Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today is Daniel McAdams. Daniel, good to see you.
Good morning, Dr. Paul.
Good. We have another little problem to settle today. We have to decide whether pivoting toward Asia, as our leaders have declared by both parties, but more recently, of course, Obama said, you know, we've done such a great job in the Middle East and in the Ukraine and Syria and Libya. We got to pivot to Asia. For them, they're talking about the Asia, which means China. We got to confront China, and they were just looking for excuses. The last couple of years, of course, we have in ways confronted, flew our planes close by, and yet now the issue is the Spratly Islands. You know, they've the Chinese in the South Sea Ocean there, the China South Sea, is the place where they're concerned about, because China has created some new islands. I want people to take a look at this because, you know, the South China Sea is big. But what we're talking about is probably a couple pinpoints there where they've created by dredging up sand this area, and they have islands here, and they could be used for military purposes. But if you look at that whole South Sea, China South Sea, this is very, very small. So the big question is, do we need to go over there? Is the navigation going to be closed down? Is that what China is threatening? For some reason, I don't think that is the case. And I think there's a lot of grandstanding, but sometimes grandstanding can lead to problems. So what's the first thing that comes to your mind about what's going on and what could happen?
Yeah. Didn't we say before the show that is it over a million square miles of South China Sea, or some well over 1 million square miles? And we're talking about a couple of very small reefs, essentially, right, that have been dredged and moved over. And it sounds like the Chinese are staking a claim far outside the mainland China. And if you sort of only see that side of it, it sounds, you know, the China is claiming something that's not theirs. But as we'd mentioned before, it's hardly the case that China is alone in this. If you look, Vietnam has claimed 48 outposts among the Spratly Islands area. Philippines have claimed 8, Malaysia 5, and Taiwan 1. So, and China has 2, so has claimed 2. So it's not that unusual, and it may be a reaction to other countries with which they have territorial disputes claiming their own. So I think there's a little bit more than meets the eye in this confrontation.
Yeah, and my first reaction is why do we need another confrontation and declare that it's the freedom of the seas that we're concerned about? $5 trillion worth of goods go back and forth, and we get $1.2 trillion from China coming down. We get to spend all our money, and we give them all those Federal Reserve notes. And so that's not going to quit. China has no interest in stopping that, and we don't have a good history of China doing that kind of thing because they're living by trade right now. And so I don't think they have any interest, and we certainly don't. But the big question is why are we there? You know, Vietnam's involved, Malaysia and Singapore and the Philippines are involved, and they have actually, you know, like you said, dredged some islands up themselves. So the principle is there. But the question, if you look for ownership, you know, ancient China declared all of the South China Sea as being part of China. Well, that's ancient and it's past. But even recently, I found it interesting, in 1947, Chiang Kai-shek, you know, our ally, declared that that whole sea was part of China. So now what we have to do is defend that, I guess, China, you know, supporting that position. But I think it can be very, very dangerous because we don't know what might happen, and it just seems so unnecessary. If they're talking about this debate over this, why are we sending a military vessel? So they want it to be military. Well, if they're worried about traveling through this area, why don't they send a commercial ship? They're not going to stop these commercial ships. And they say, well, you know, the hawks are saying, China's spending more money now than ever on their military. They keep building, and by 2020, they're going to have a huge amount. And yet we're 3 or 4 times more spending in our military than China. But still, the hawks, and I just wonder, could it be possible that the military-industrial complex has an interest in this to keep the agitation coming? Maybe they want to build more vessels. You know, we've been told that the military's been gutted. You know, we have to build more. So there might be a little bit of that too.
Do you remember, it was a few months ago, I think we even spoke about it on this show, that the U.S. military flew a spy plane over those islands, and it took the extraordinary move of taking a CNN cable television crew with them to film them spying on these islands. So if you think about what this is as sort of a propaganda ploy, that certainly is very unusual. But I think you're right. You know, the claim is always made when people say we need to cut back on the military. Don't you know what they're doing to keep the ship lanes open? Without them, we wouldn't be able to conduct any trade. We need to have control of the world, control the Navy, you know.
Well, this raises interesting questions about sovereignty. How far out does our sovereignty go? You know, in Texas, in the Gulf, it's 3 miles for the states and then up to 12 nautical miles for the federal government. But what are we doing? Aren't we drilling oil hundreds of miles off the coast, 200 miles? And it is true. So our sovereignty goes out, but that's probably true with other countries too. And they go out and they declare that they're really in charge. So we mine and drill and for oil 200 miles offshore, but China's not going to be drilling out there without our permission. So we have our national sovereignty way out past 12 miles. So this whole thing is way blown out of proportion. I thought it was interesting to find out when our exclusive economic zone was declared 200 nautical miles offshore, and it was our friend Ronald Reagan that did this by executive order. So, but then there's part of this argument here is that our government wants to have it both ways. They want to say that we have the Law of the Sea Treaty on our side, and they're breaking this federal law, and we're going to talk to the Law of the Sea people. yeah, we've never ratified that treaty, so yes, we won't sign it. But if we want to take our position, we do. But if you think about it, when you think of this, about how much trade's going on, the size of this area, and the size of this little postage stamp that is changing to confront with military equipment, battleship, you know, cruisers and military weaponry, it's way out of proportion. It may be they just like it a little distraction from the failures every place else. So maybe if they can confront China and China backs down, they can have bragging rights, you know. And there was one quote from Carter, Secretary of Defense. He said, we can sail or fly any place we please. So that's a little bit arrogant and just sort of provoking other people. So so much of this is unnecessary provocation to other countries.
In a way, it's kind of a preemptive non-war or semi-war, because the U.S. is concerned, or so they say, that China will cut down the trade lanes in the region. But you know, 80% of China's trade goes through the South China Sea, and that's China's bread and butter, has been trade. So it doesn't make any sense that China would cut off its nose to spite its face on this. But even if that were the case, there would be some examples in the past of China limiting trade or taking a military move to stop commercial vessels, and we have not seen that in the past. So it's this kind of a preemptive thing that you know really fails to make a lot of sense.
Sometimes administrations pander to their opponents. They might not agree with them, but you know, if the hawks are sort of catching up, we have to look more hawkish. That actually was the case with Kennedy versus Goldwater. Kennedy thought he had to be tougher than he really wanted to be, but he got us all into a lot of trouble. I think that happens with our government now because of all the noise we hear, you know, in the Congress. The people, I mean, it's gung-ho. I bet we could have trouble finding a dozen people in Congress right now say, hey, slow up. Maybe we don't need to do this. Maybe we can talk to people. Maybe we can continue our navigation and see what happens instead of confrontation. But this, but the ones in Congress, I think they'll be gung-ho, and maybe this is part of the administration. Say, well, we have to look tough. You know, we have to maybe defend Hillary. Of course, I don't think she needs any encouragement. government to be acting tough. So wouldn't it would not be difficult to predict Hillary's position on sending our Navy over to the South China Sea.
Of course, this is not to say that the Chinese military are a bunch of Boy Scouts. I would imagine that the Chinese military probably likes this little bit of confrontation too, because it helps justify their budgets. But the difference, sorry to interrupt, but the difference is, look how close that is to China versus how far it is from us.
Yeah, and I think that China, like you say, they're no angels, and I believe they're acting for their national security interests, and they're also probably looking after their commercial interests. It's not like the South China Sea might not have oil underneath it, and that would give them a greater chance for independence, you know, from importing oil. So there's a lot of things going there, but it's the military confrontation that we have to think about. Now, if China we're talking about one small area where they've created an island, but if China did anything to interfere with the ships, that would be a different story. Yeah. You know, not too many years ago, I think it was in the 70s, there was a libertarian group that wanted to have its own country, so they started dredging, and they had this island half built, but the surrounding areas, I don't remember exactly, but it was in the Pacific, they came and closed them down. They wouldn't permit it. So this whole idea, there was no question about who owned what, but it was just international waters that was generally not owned by one country. I would think it'd be nice to be able to create your own island. Ooh. And my idea would be, don't let the governments do it. Don't give the governments money to do it. So when you and I get to be very wealthy, we can go out there and create our own island on international water, and we're not going to interfere with any travel or any trade. So, you know, that would be a way of doing it. Just think that, what is the Earth? 3/4 water? There'd be a lot of opportunities there.
We could have the studio on the beach.
Yeah, there you go. But right now, I mean, we feel compelled to confront and provoke, and so unnecessary with all the other problems that we have with all our interventions around the world, especially in the Middle East and Africa. I mean, we keep expanding over there. You think they'd drop off and drop one or two of them and settle something. But if they think that has been very successful and that we should be involved in worrying about what South Vietnam wants and what Vietnam wants and what the Philippines want, even though they might have been participating in the same principle, you know, for us to do that, Japan has an interest in this too. Let them. Japan was welcoming us to come over here and deal with that. But I think it'd be much better when you do have problems like this that it be handled locally, sort of like in the Middle East, no outside interference, and we'd all be a lot better off. Yeah. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today for the Liberty Report, and this Spratly Island incident that is ongoing is going to continue because our government has indicated that this is just not a one-shot. We're going to continue to do it to provoke and to antagonize the Chinese to say we are going to go within the 12-mile limit of these newly created islands. China, not perfect, and probably has ulterior motives, but that doesn't give us justification to go overboard and going 6,000 to 7,000 miles away from home to say that you're not going to do this, and to prove that we're going to take a big naval military ship and intrude on that 12 nautical miles of that new island. Trade and travel and navigation has not been interfered with. I don't believe for a minute that China wants to do this. And once again, the solution to these kind of problems, they should be handled locally, and they should be handled with us minding our own business. We don't need to be involved in this. If they blockade our vessels and we couldn't travel and couldn't trade, that's a different story. But this is not what this is all about. This is something that probably serves the interests of the neocons and the military-industrial complex, but it doesn't serve our interests. It doesn't serve our financial interests, and it doesn't serve our national security interests. The only thing that does that is good common sense, following the Constitution, and stay out of the affairs of other nations, and I believe we would all be a lot better off. I want to thank you for tuning in today to the Liberty Report, and please come back soon.